Welcome to Garden Views, interesting conversations with interesting people who have done and or are doing interesting things. So sit back and enjoy. Welcome everyone into Garden Views, and this week we are interviewing a gentleman with a very extensive resume, and it's going to take me so long to read just his bio that I want to say hello first. It's Deric Gilliard. How are you? Welcome into the garden.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate being here and glad to talk to some folk from the northeast part of the country, although I'm sure you have audience all over.
I certainly hope I have audience all over. So a couple of weeks ago, I saw some numbers and I went up by 3 people in Kazakhstan. Now, I don't know. I don't know if that meant I went from 0 to 3 or went from like 3,100 to 3,103, but those folks in Kazakhstan, I hope you're still here. Sometimes looking at those things are fun. I don't do it nearly enough. Anyway, let us talk about the brief bio updated in 2024. So Deric A. Gilliard retired in 2022 after 25 years as a federal employee working with under political appointments working with political appointees in the Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden administration, so we're very proximate. Prior to his work as public affairs advisors to the Health and Human Services regional directors for the 8 southeastern states, Gilliard served as the National Communications Director for Dr. King's organization, yes, that Dr. King, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Gilliard also worked in communications for 2 historically Black colleges and universities and wrote for USA Today, Time, and the Wichita Eagle Beacon, and was an editor for the Atlanta Daily World. I probably shouldn't ask this question, but how did the Wichita Eagle Beacon get in there? Is that like, are you from there? Is an important person in your life from there?
Good question. So my father was career military, and at the time he retired, he was based in Fort Riley, Kansas, which is kind of back and forth where I spent a lot of my formative years after he came back from Germany. I think I was 4 years old on the boat from Atlanta to Germany, and then came back at maybe about 7. So then we were on and off of there. When he went back, he did 2 tours in Nam and 1 in Korea. I tell people, Jeff, frequently, only half jokingly, he was running from my mother. But that seemed to be the base most often. And when I realized I was not going to be a pro baseball player and I always liked to write, and a journalist, KU, University of Kansas, had a strong journalism program. So I just went down the street there. And my first job out of college was at the Wichita Eagle Beacon, which is now only the Wichita Eagle because the afternoon paper, as many have done, closed, a year and a half after I got there.
Understood. How close were you to becoming a pro ball player? Was it just a child's dream?
I got to play significantly. It was a little more than a child's dream. I was a pretty good player and got to play at some reasonably high levels.
Okay. Were you with the Durham Bulls?
No, it wasn't the Durham Bulls. It was the New York franchise, actually.
Was it the Tidewater Tides?
How'd you know?
I am uncanny that way. I had my people check up on you.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding. It's just a lucky guess. I'm originally from New York, so I have some familiarity with the Tidewater Tides and, whatever. Anyway, let's just stick with I'm uncanny. Edit all that out about me explaining it. Okay. All right. Back to your bio. You're currently working as a consultant with WSP, a multinational company that was awarded a grant from the DOI to develop National Park Service, so that's Department of Interior, National Park Service monuments to honor and memorialize the contributions of the 1961 Freedom Riders. He is a career communications professional, adept at strategic planning and the execution of communication strategies that promote organizational messaging and branding. Key policy issues within his portfolio include the Affordable Care Act, you've heard of that, maternal health, HIV and AIDS, SUDS, Medicaid expansion, healthcare access, COVID, diversity, and the CARES Act. A public speaker and historian, Gilliard spoke to the troops in Germany shortly before Desert Storm and served as the first keynote speaker at the Rosa Parks Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. So those of you who are wondering why I'm still reading, you're done wondering now. And that's not the end. But he did say he was already the son of military parents. Oh, I said dad and running for mom, but mom also a military parent, apparently. Gilliard served as the principal non-Muslim promoter of the Million Man March, covered the Atlanta missing and murdered children cases, and worked with SCLC President Lowry to raise the issues of economic justice, voter redistricting, and the burning of black churches. Gilliard authored his master's thesis on Joseph Eccles Lowry and the resurrection of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He's the author of Living in the Shadows of a Legend, Unsung Heroes and Sheroes, who marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he's earning his BA because, hey, he's not idle, in journalism at the University of Kansas, and his MA, earning his, already earned, and you already said the University of Kansas before, KU. By the way, we've had a repeat guest on my sister show, Professor John Hoops, in archaeology and anthropology. Maybe you were acquainted. I don't know. And his Master's of Arts in African American Studies at Georgia State University. Gilliard is a member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated and the National Association of Black Journalists. So while that is a mouthful, I didn't want to give short shrift to any of that. And so, yeah, welcome again. And so congratulations on the book. Thank you for being here. When we were initially talking, you're like, what do you want to know about my federal employment? I'm like, well, I'm sort of, interested in sort of this whole deep state thing. And then, I'm interested in international law enforcement. You're like, well, maybe I know some people, but that's not what I do. Do you still want to talk? I'm like, yeah, sure. I mean, look at that resume. Of course I want to talk to you. So, I mean, you've spanned basically my entire adult life in, around public policy. So, I guess, how'd you start besides, not quite reaching not quite being Crash Davis, almost being Crash Davis, but not quite going to the show?
Well, thank you, Jeff. Yeah, one of the things I would say about my career in federal government, because I work for people on both sides of the aisle, I had to be certain amount flexible, as you can imagine, because my job was to carry out the person's policy, whether it was left or right or in the center. And, unlike, I would say, I'll just take a step before it. Unlike some of the people who will be challenged in this next administration, I was able to make an oath of allegiance to the Constitution and the flag, not to an individual. So some of the times I agreed with the policy, some of the times I didn't, but my job was to make my boss, the regional director, look as good as possible. And my boss was always carrying out the edicts and the priorities of the Secretary of Health and Human Services, who reported, of course, to the president.
And their agenda, they never had their own agenda superior to the president. There's this myth of deep state operatives sort of, undermining the president or their higher ups is at least a fallacy in your experience.
Yeah, I never worked for anybody who sought to undermine any of the regional directors. I think that they were, because all of them usually had done something specific in support of the president before they got their appointments. I'll give you an example. One of my first regional director under Donald Trump was one of the first people in Congress to endorse him. She was a Republican congresswoman named Renee Elmers from North Carolina, and she was in adamant Anti-Affordable Care Act attack dog. And so she had served in Congress with the first HHS secretary before he got into trouble from flying on a private jets.
I remember.
Oftentimes. So that was kind of the way it was. In Obama's administration, the first regional director under him was somebody that was his campaign manager in the state of South Carolina, and he was a state representative, and so that was kind of how he got the appointment. So all of them have done something to show their allegiance, or that they were pretty much, thought the same way and would be an asset to that particular president.
And your job was just to carry out their wishes, which generally always were the edicts of the commander-in-chief.
Yep, just to make them look good, get them on media, get them in front of people who were supporters and colleagues, and people who wanted to see that agenda forwarded and would support that in any number of ways.
How'd you break into government, out of, AAA ball and social justice? I mean, it's not unusual for someone involved in community activism and social justice and charities, and especially a jock as well, to be someone that's sort of targeted for, politics. But, I don't want to assume anything here.
No, that's a great question, Jeff. And I'll say this. The last thing I had wanted to do or thought I would ever do would be work in government. When I got to Atlanta in '79, after I left the paper in Wichita, I had a first cousin, who was very involved in government, and actually for the Department of Education. He kept saying, listen, great opportunities, you need to come over here and apply, you have the credentials, et cetera, et cetera. They're looking for people like you, and I wasn't interested. I had the ink in my blood, and so I did a lot of things in between there and then, but so the way it happened was ultimately, and I did work for a couple of historically Black colleges and universities, and as I said, I was a stringer for Time magazine and was with USA Today the first 10 years, but all those things were not that financially rewarding. And as my family started to grow, and then what happened was, I had my own firm for a while, and published my own newspapers, a sports newspaper, but that's hit and miss. You got to sell the ads and all this and all that. But my oldest son started to have happened to somebody told me, well, they're hiring. Dr. King's organization is looking for a communications director. And I said, well, okay, let me go check. And they were paying a little more than I thought. It was decent money. And so I said, well, okay, I never thought I'd do something like that, but I went. And those 4 years, Jeff, changed my life, because I found out my purpose in my life, spending my time there, because it was just, it was a perfect fit. It's so very different from government in that I didn't have a bunch of people I had to report to. Government is notorious for having all these levels and layers of people that you have to get approval from. But I worked for the president, and I was able to message. And the 4 years I was there, I never called fewer than 100 press conferences a year, because I used to tell people, every time, Joseph Lowry would call a press conference, it was time to go to the bathroom. And he was really brilliant in front of a camera. He was a tremendous spokesperson, and he challenged. On one occasion, I'll tell you that we were on the picket line in this company called Prior Tire, which was challenging affirmative action in Atlanta. Atlanta was one of the first major cities, particularly in the South, that developed a set-aside program for 25% of all the contracts had to go to the African American community in whatever area. So that was under Maynard Jackson, the first black mayor of a major city in the South. And this company was seeking to overturn it. And so we're on the picket line. And so one of the times I wrote a press release saying Lauer leaves the picket line to go with the president, said, and which was true. He left the picket line. So I had a chance to really be creative and really do things, and it was really good because I think, again, I only remember two of the best conferences I ever had in the 4 years where nobody came. So that was, a really powerful and positive situation. But when my oldest son started to have seizures at 17 out of the blue, one of the things about small organizations, they gave me health insurance, but not the family. And, women and children always need health insurance, right? So at that point in time, I had to go look for a real job. And that was when only 2 times in my life I don't know if even people will do this anymore, but in the 70s and 60s and the 80s, people would actually apply for jobs through the newspaper.
Sure.
Well, I did, and I was hired by this white liberal nurse in the Clinton administration who told me she thought her office needed to better reflect the people we served in our region, which is, the 8 southeastern states where you had the most poverty, the most black people, the most health disparities, the lowest education overall. And so I was the first person in the country that was hired to be a public affairs representative specialist for HHS for the regional appointee. And so that was how that kind of journey happened. And then I just stayed, and, for all those 4 administrations.
Yeah. How has
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. How has government changed from the Clinton administration to the Biden administration? And obviously there were some notorious bookends, and not bookends, but yeah. Well, again, we have Trump, who's so much different than Biden, and then you have Obama, so much different than Trump, and Bush, so much different than Obama. In hindsight, I don't know if Bush was that much different than Clinton, but at the time it felt like a big sea change. Was there a big change in your world at your level? How did it feel? I guess looking back, not at the time necessarily. So
I would say this, and since I was there for like 2 years of Clinton, I was kind of figuring out which way is up, right? One thing about government, you have all these acronyms, and like HHS has like 13 agencies. So it was a lot to figure out. So that's kind of what I was doing the first 2 years. I would say that, Clinton, very much a populist, right? But I think all of those folk, with the exception of Trump, were kind of traditional politicians. They were nobody that shook things up, that was really kind of had an anti-government, anti-establishment rhetoric and even policies like Donald Trump. So, for example, with Bush, I think that there were things that obviously I'll say this about Clinton, and you'll, I'm sure, agree. So the definition of sex changed under Bill Clinton, right? Because, oral sex. And so, but he was very popular, but of course, in the latter years, he is taking credit. He doesn't want to take credit for the crime bill, and the super predators. And that's one of the things that I think will be with him long term. If I looked at George W. Bush, obviously Katrina was a huge problem and mistake for his administration, and the other one was the weapons in the nuclear weapons in Iraq, which there were none. But I would say that on the plus side for Bush, I liked his compassionate capitalism perspective. The couple of things he did, he initiated something called a Healthy Marriage Initiative. And the Healthy Marriage Initiative was really focused on people in a lot of maybe inner city communities, but communities where people had not experienced what you would call a healthy marriage.
Is there such a thing? That's a joke.
Well, a lot. I'm at an inner city church in Atlanta. It's in a really gritty neighborhood, and it's an intentionally multicultural church. But all of the people, I would say that the vast majority of the people in that church, the Anglos in the church, all have a master's degree and above. When we got there, almost all of the African Americans in the church had at the most a high school education. So I remember when one of our white associate pastors got married, and all the kids wanted to go because a lot of them had never been to a wedding before. So, what gets modeled to us is very important, right? He had another initiative called Grandparents Raising Grandchildren. And so, again, in our society, so many people, particularly I would say in certain neighborhoods, where moms may be taken out by addictions like crack and cocaine and other things. Heroin had ravaged that particular community, back in the 70s and the 80s. And so, and he had some programs that were really aimed at helping and bolstering families who had their principal wage earner was imprisoned. So that was kind of a compassionate capitalism piece that I really appreciated from his administration. And then, of course, in the Obama administration, to me, it was obviously special being an African American to work for the first African American president and to work on the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, which 7 presidents beforehand had tried to establish, something akin to a universal health care. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the 7 of the 8 states that we worked in all had Republican governors who had no interest in expanding Medicaid. So they made it as difficult as possible for us. So we had to go into the states and set up what they call FFMs, federally facilitated marketplaces, as opposed to working with the states to make it better. So that was a real, high. And I'll say this, our staff, which is a small staff, it was 5 in all, we didn't do it, but we coordinated the navigators, the federally qualified health centers, and all the organizations like the NAACP, Planned Parenthood, and all these organizations, Children's Defense Fund, who said, well, we're not getting any pay for this, but we know that how important this is to our community, so we want to help. And so our region, our 8 states, enrolled just under 24% of the people that now have the ACA Obamacare in the entire country. And so that was, something I'm really proud about and excited to have just had the honor of participating in.
Yeah, healthcare is such a complicated and difficult issue. And, I remember the debates around the Affordable Care Act, and there's a lot of people who are saying, they still say, we don't want 1/6 of the economy being in the government's hands. There was the whole death panel thing, which is sort of a bastardization of a truism that like 50% of all healthcare costs are paid in the last 6 months of people's lives, and maybe just people having living wills, with DNRs if they want DNR. I mean, your DNR doesn't have to be DNR. You can lose the D. You can have it you can have the R. You can lose the DN. You can have doesn't have to be do not resuscitate. It can be absolutely resuscitate. You can say heroic measures, but in my experience, most people choose the DNR aspect of it, at least for some of the. So it's not really like anyone was going to take your choice. It's just that like something like at least 2 doctors need to certify you're in this perpetual state that isn't going to improve. And there was the whole Terry Schiavo case, and sort of the reverse of mass hysteria was sort of like mass convincing yourselves that because her eyes were open and occasionally she blinked, that she was thinking. And finally, 11 years later, and the family torn asunder, and I think now, 15 years in the past, everyone knows that she was brain dead. And an interesting that you touched on it, you didn't really say it, and I didn't know this until, instinctively I think I did, but, post-election you have all of the pundits, reading all the stats and, saying and everyone says what you should have known before, but now you know it because you were afraid to say it before, whatever. Anyway, the point is that the African-American community is to the right of the Democratic Party, or at least the furthest parts of the left, but socially conservative, which, this is your fault because you got me on the, the Healthy Marriage Act, and that's a very socially conservative kind of position. And the people who usually voice against it are saying, well, that's unfair to single parents. Usually it means single mothers, because let's face it, it's more men, the cat away than more women, cat away. I'm sure they pass away in similar numbers, but there's also there's far more men incarcerated. There's more men in the military, et cetera, et cetera. We're starting to get at the meat and hedge outwards, and I guess let's just say at the meat. But and then other people on the other side, they have the platitude. If it was so difficult to come up with healthcare, how come 49 other countries have? Like, well, I know how they did. Their federal tax rate is 49 to 60%. That's how. And if we want that, then say it. Have that debate. It might be, if you want to have 4 weeks of vacation a year and a better retirement fund and socialized healthcare, that's how you get there. And you can look at you could do it alphabetically, Australia, Austria, whatever, and go to, I don't know, whatever Z country is, or Y, maybe Yugoslavia. Well, it doesn't exist anymore. Help me out here with a country it doesn't matter. My alphabetical
Germany,
thing. Yeah.
Canada, yeah.
Norway, Finland. You could see what they all offer and what their tax rate is, with the caveat that we shoulder the load of the Western world's military. So, and there's got to be some accommodation for that.
At least today. I don't know if we will in 6 weeks, but yes.
Well, yeah, there are very mixed signals on that. They want to be strong to protect the homeland, and they want to be strong against China, sort of. I'm not really sure what they want. I don't know where I was going with this, except that I guess I have an expert here. Is there sort of like a common sense healthcare solution that is closer? Because Obamacare helped a lot, but it was supposed to be universal healthcare, and it increased to like 7% or something, and healthcare costs have not gone down. The deductibles still suck. I was on the exchange for a couple of years. I nearly went bankrupt using my credit for a couple of years until I got a real job to be able to get insured and start taking care of that. So is there a common sense solution that doesn't necessarily mean 55% tax rates, but also everyone gets covered?
Sure. Let me make this. I'd like to make a pitch for the Affordable Care Act.
Go ahead.
And what I mean is that it absolutely wasn't perfect. It was a flawed system. There were some really wonderful things that everybody liked, even the Republicans, like, you can keep your kids on your health insurance till they're 26, kind of catch them through the college age years. Sure. A lot of people had a problem, particularly men, they had something called the 10 essential health benefits, and one of them included maternal health care. And so some men said, well, I'm never going to get pregnant. Why should I, support that? Now, I know there's an argument for that. There was something called an individual mandate that a lot of people didn't like, and that was that if you didn't get health care, if you didn't sign up, then there was a penalty. And of course, that tax penalty helped pay for the people who absolutely couldn't pay for for it. So that you were supplementing, the people who were, honestly, are working poor, because you had to make $11,000, maybe $11,700 to qualify. Well, you and I know who can live on $11,700, right? So those were some of the things that people pushed back on. And I think that, unfortunately, instead of the Republicans at that time working with the Democrats to bolster the weak points, to make it better, to refine it, to strengthen it, they did the opposite. You remember when Mitch McConnell said, "My goal is to make Obama a one-time term president," and so there was this real pushback there. And when Trump came in, what he did was he created a situation where you call narrow networks. So let's say you were in a state where there were 5 insurance options. Well, because of the pressure that he put on them, you would go down to 1 or 2 in some of the states, particularly the poor states. So the less competition, the higher the prices were. And so those are some of the things that were really problematic. And again, all of the governors who could have expanded Medicaid, and the way that would have worked, the first year, the state would pick up 10% of the cost. The next year, you pick up 20%, but the federal government is picking up all the rest. And so all of the economic studies said that you would create so much, you would bolster the economy, because you'd have to hire all these people, and you'd have the money to do so, to support the people who were coming into the healthcare system. Because traditionally, if we wait till we are really in dire straits, and all too often people who don't have insurance will do that, they'll drag themselves into the public hospital and pay 4 to 5 times the amount, because you're in critical care now as opposed to preventative care. So again, it could have been a lot better. And I think, of course, then Biden reversed all those things that Trump cut by 70%. He cut the advertising. He cut the funding for the navigators. See, the problem is, I think, in my opinion, Jeff, the health insurance navigators are really not for people who are learned people, who are computer literate, who are people who have means. It's for the people who are least educated. They're poor. They're have a distrust of the healthcare system because of historical injustices. And so those are the people that got hurt when you cut all that funding and that education, and the people that would help those people. And the rest of us, we went on about our businesses. And so that's the problem, is that some people, I don't know, in my opinion, I think that we have a certain obligation to the people who, pick our fruits and vegetables, the people who work in our meat packing plants, who cut our hair and park our cars and stock our groceries. And so if we leave them vulnerable without health insurance, I think in the end it hurts all of us, but not at the time.
Yeah, there are always those arguments with theory and how it will benefit and have cascading effects. And, the way our system works, it's sometimes impossible to tell whether that's true or not for 8, 9, 10, 11 years, sometimes a couple generations. And while this is a simple question, I don't think that's a simple answer, but isn't the biggest problem with all this the fact that we're calling it insurance? Isn't the problem that there's insurance companies? I mean, if there were just no insurance companies and it was actually a giant government pool of money, or an administration that acted like a nice insurance company instead, wasn't the problem that there's like 9,000 insurance companies out there all saying, no, we have to be involved. So, sure, I think it's great if every state had, 14 companies, bidding for customers, but that's so complicated. I can tell you as a customer in Maryland, I don't want choice. I want, everyone's like, there's Medicare A, B, C, and D. I don't want there to be Medicare A, B, C, and D. I want there to be Medicare. I don't want to have to think about just cover everything I'm paying into my entire life. Just cover it. It's like we overcomplicate anything, and I think it has to do with the fact that there are private insurance companies still somehow trying to make money off this for their shareholders, which they have to do, which is another issue. We have to sort of change. I don't know if it's possible, but fiduciary laws to have some type of morality in addition, beyond just maximizing profits. I mean, there has to be some sort of morality level in it, because I'm a capitalist. I say it probably every week that we talk about politics or policy. I read Yuval Noah Harari. I believe that he's much smarter than me. I believe him when he says that 250 years ago, the world was 90% in poverty and 10% not, and now we're 90% not in poverty and 10% in poverty, and that's due to capitalism. I believe, but unfettered capitalism, leads to, no offense to my friends in, some developing worlds, but gives you an economy like India or Russia or Argentina, where you got, 1 to 7% of the population that's doing good to great, and the rest of them are basically serfs, or living on $240 a month. Like in Russia, like the average person makes $4,800 a year, U.S. equivalent. That's hideous. And this is Russia. We're supposed to be terrified of them. I mean, they have nukes, so so. Back to my question: is the real problem that we have insurance companies involved in this?
That's certainly part of the problem. I think that some of the regulation, for example, one of the things that the Obama administration put in place that was positive was that, for example, you can go to Hospital A in Chicago and you can go to Hospital B and Hospital C and get 3 very different prices on a hip replacement. So they made sure that you had to post your price so that people would know going in. And that was one of the things I think was an important benefit, because it kept people from, basically getting screwed. And so I think the regulation of these insurance companies has to be better, more strident, more consistent, because you're right, because most of them, they're just out to make money. I mean, we just saw what happened on the streets in New York, and that was, that had to do with some of the distrust and somebody feeling an abuse. And I'm not trying to justify it in any way, but I mean, those things do happen, unfortunately.
Right. We don't want to turn an assassin, a felon, into a folk hero, but let's face it. I mean, every year, the 5th of November, people sing about Guy Fawkes. I mean, this would not be the first criminal who became a folk. I mean, Robin Hood is a folk. So we understand that it's not a moral equivalency, but yeah, everyone kind of understood not the action to do it, but the motivation. I mean, the suspect, and it's strange, wealthy family, young, good looking, had some back pain, but, probably could have taken care of it through his, family's fortune, without insurance. I mean, but that's the way the world works. Sometimes, the whoever snaps doesn't fit into our box of what they'd like them to fit into. And that's probably when we need to pay the most attention. Because if it was like, an Antifa anarchist or, someone who had been working for, 47 years and was constantly being denied benefits for a workers' comp, injury for 17 years, that would almost make sense. This is so bizarre that it captivates people, and it tells you how pervasive the problem is. I want to jump to something. One thing I want to push back a little bit. I think the pricing thing was nice, but I think sometimes people in government get a little bit excited about disclosures and privacy notices and publishing the number of calories on a box and spend a lot. I don't think a single person gives a damn how much their hip replacement costs as long as the insurance company's paying for it. I don't care whether Northwest Hospital charges $54,000, Sinai charges $37,000 hospital, or GBMC charges $42,000. I couldn't care less as long as my insurance covers it. And I think that's all people care about. And I think that's sometimes the problem with government is people like proclaim, like when we have those hearings, when Congress has those hearings with social media, moguls all the time, and they find out all of the promises they haven't kept, all the data that they're keeping, the metadata, and all the terrible things they can do with it. None of it stops. What happens is they end up saying, okay, well, we'll share it with the government. We'll give you a report every year, which maybe someone goes to. I mean, who cares? That's just giving all the metadata to the government. That's compounding the problem. That doesn't make it better. And I think that and that's why some people call it a kabuki dance, and that's why people say the fix is in and nobody's for me. I don't expect you to address that unless you have an easy answer. You're not here to defend the government.
I would ask though, but what about the deductibles, and what about the cap that you have? Mm-hmm. Because, for example, one of the things that was very important, if you had pre-existing conditions before the Affordable Care Act,
oh, that was great.
Insurance companies could, charge anything they wanted to.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And so, I'll say that there were a handful of really good things about it, a handful of things that weren't, that either needed maybe to be scrapped or drastically improved upon. But a big problem with government is an unwillingness to work together to come up with a better plan and a better solution, I think.
And that's gotten worse.
And there was, I don't know if you remember this, but of course, being a black man, I'm sensitive to all these things, but I don't know if you remember when Congressman Joe Wilson stood up during Obama's State of the Union address and yelled,
liar. Yeah, I remember.
And later he said, well, it's the politically correct thing to be against the black man in the White House. So there was this, resistance. And I think that Donald Trump was, this backlash to Obama.
To an extent. I mean, he's definitely a populist backlash, and that doesn't quite make sense except for the reality show. But I don't really want to get into Trump too much. It is a rabbit hole that we'd be in forever. But a little bit, because RFK Jr. might be the head of the Health and Human Services. Yes. And he's sort of a folk hero also. That was the segue with Luigi Mangione. And listen, the guy looks like he's in great shape. He's got a really interesting backstory. I'll just leave it at, he's got like a worm in his brain. He's apparently left dead bear cubs in parks. May not be the first animal he's killed. His wife committed suicide like a decade ago after discovering he had affairs with 37 women in the prior calendar year and wrote about it. I mean, not exactly, but he's in terrific shape, and he talks about things like America, we're getting fatter and our food is poor and things are listed organic and they're not really organic. And he's right about stuff like that. I mean, and I've heard Congress people say, listen, if our country is trending towards 50% diabetes, and if we get to 50% diabetes, it doesn't matter what we do with healthcare. We're done. The budget is done, which might be a hyperbole, but I don't expect you to answer that too. But he also does things like he says that more people died of the polio vaccine than polio. Bullshit. He also says thinks that raw milk is good for you. No, it isn't. I mean, pasteurization is one of the miracles of the last century or so. And I know that there was a huge overreaction to the COVID vaccine. There's still people saying that, it's killed anyone. There's like no data to it. And, maybe like a lot of drugs that get FDA approval in 20 years, there will be more to it than nothing, but it's probably not going to be anything, to the extent. And as far as I know, I have not been activated by Bill Gates to do any Manchurian candidate assassinations. So without getting too much into him personally, because I think I already did that myself without putting you under that bus, how much can one man as the secretary really impact the system and all of us from your experience as actually being in that department?
I saw an interesting interview with Kathleen Sebelius, former governor of Kansas, who was the secretary, HHS secretary under Obama, the first one. And of course, HHS is a $1.7 trillion agency. We call it the cradle to the grave agency. So Medicare, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, CDC, the FDA, all of the NIH, all of those monstrous agencies. So I think that when I think about Robert F. Kennedy, I'm concerned about his, being his anti-vaxxer stance.
Mm-hmm.
Because,
Me too.
You talk about polio. We had essentially eradicated polio in this country. So if he takes the move to, and a lot of it too isn't even about banning something or not promoting it, but if you tell people that it's bad for you or don't do it, it's almost the same, because a lot of people, several 100,000 people, according to places like the Kaiser Foundation, died during COVID because they were getting the wrong messages and the CDC was muted. So that's a concern I have. I mean, obviously he's not taken, to my knowledge, he's not an epidemiologist. He's not a doctor. He has no formal training, although he's done research. I mean, I give that, but hey, we don't usually put people in front of, as the head of a massive agency because, they've done some side studies. So you think about measles, whooping cough, all these things could come back with a vengeance under this administration. I'm pretty confident a year from now, 2 years from now, if these measures are relaxed, you're going to have a lot more people being sick and dying than have recently. And there's some people who support him. I will go along with that. But I think that some of it is really, if you, you're talking about getting rid of the NIH, you're talking about, well, I'll tell you this, the CDC was muzzled during the last administration. There was a person named Robert Caputo, who was a public affairs person like me, and everything that the CDC said had to be signed off by him in D.C. at the White House. No, he again had no healthcare background at all, but it was about the messaging. Was it supportive or counter to the message coming out of the Oval Office? So those are things, having people sign an oath of loyalty. I think it hurts the career people, the people who are there to do the best job they can to protect the American people. So I think those are real concerns. As you mentioned, our definition of what the family is, whether you're somebody who's basically a social conservative like me, but I think everybody has a right to exist and a right to health care and a right to agency and the right to say whomever they want to be able to, be the authority figure if they're on their deathbed or need that critical care. But I think all of that could change under this administration. So the rights of LGBTQ people who, were very much enhanced, I think, over in the Biden administration. So those are concerns that I have in terms of the potential power. Now he would have to go through three House and 2 Senate confirmations. So that will be very interesting to see how it goes. But it could be a lot of the damages. I personally, Jeff, think that whoever's in charge, I want them to be honest and forthcoming to the American people. And I'm concerned about, these. I believe in science. I think we have to trust somebody. In 1901 or 1902, when we had the was the Spanish flu pandemic, the world's biggest at that particular time. People in New York City, you could see them lined up for miles to come in and get the vaccine because they trusted the science. Now, people will tell you they don't know who to trust or what to trust. So that's a scary proposition to me, because you had my own sister, younger sister, and she was very, very concerned. She didn't want to go get the vaccine. I said, well, and particular certain populations, of course, Black people, Tuskegee, there's several situations where there's been this abuse. But I had to tell her, I said, well, we have to trust somebody, right? And so those are my concerns, is that I don't want us to make polio and whooping cough, these things that we have essentially eradicated. I have concerns about them coming back with a vengeance. And there's always a new strain every year of COVID. That's not going away. So if we don't treat it with seriousness, if we tell people, you can go to school and it doesn't matter if you're vaccinated or not vaccinated, there's always the vulnerable that I have concern about. Those are the people that we should be most, I think, concerned about, is the people who, they have all of the diabetes, they have heart disease, they have, all of these issues that make them, could make them a victim very quickly because they have these chronic diseases. So I just hope that we keep those in mind when we, make the rules and the regulations, and even the what would you call it, the guidance that we put forth.
Well, it'll be interesting to watch. That's saying something, because the people who have told us don't trust anything, it's a deep state, don't trust anything you're hearing.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, basically the podcasters, and I'm a podcaster, are now in power. So the interesting thing is to see is if the people who didn't trust anything before will now trust these same things just because there's new heads there and the voices are saying. Now, what damage they cause, I don't know. But if they can reincorporate trust into institutions.
Yes.
Most damage is temporary, not all. So that's a giant, there's a giant underscore the important words there. But anyway, we could talk forever about policy, and you're very nice at humoring me in pretending that I actually understand policy and intricacies. And I was a poli-sci major, but I got out of college in 1990, so it's been a while. But I do talk to some smart people, but that's basically the same thing as saying I did research, bro. So let's talk about your book. So the longest 4 years of my life. Let's sell that. Let's push the veil a little bit.
Sure. So early on in the Trump administration, it became apparent to me that this was going to be different than any of the other presidents I've worked for. So it was just. I felt in my spirit I needed to start documenting that experience. And so, I write from three prisms: as race, as a Black man; two, as a Christian; and three, as somebody whose foundation is in justice. Having worked at Dr. King's organization. My father was a guinea pig in the Korean War, one of those people that was plugged into all white platoon, to see how it was worked, the whole integration thing. And so I saw him in many instances, come from a 12-person family in a deep rural poverty South. But, he got into the military and he did very well. He rose to the highest rank you could rise to as an enlisted man. And nobody loved this country like my father. My father didn't like Muhammad Ali, so I didn't like Muhammad Ali. My father swore by the flag of this country. And of course, as I grew older, I developed my own thoughts and opinions. But so it was just, the things that were done that I personally experienced the ACA was still the law of the land, but we were prevented until we could not support the Affordable Care Act. So for me, I'm thinking about the people, the most vulnerable people in our society that I mentioned, like the people in Mississippi, which is last or 49th and everything, and every year I would take a 6-city tour from just outside of Memphis all the way down to the Gulf of Mississippi. And somebody would arrange that, and we would stop and we'd get media and we'd have an event and people could ask questions, and we talk about what had changed in the Affordable Care Act, what were the qualifications, where would you get your help, who could you talk to? You could talk to insurance companies, you could talk to federally qualified health centers, which provide 40% of the care in this country to the uninsured on a sliding fee scale, where you could go talk to the navigators. And so you gave them the options, you tell them where, how, what the timelines were. And so they told us we weren't going to be out in the field supporting these organizations and groups anymore. So I had to write a letter or an email. I went to my Republican boss, the RD that I mentioned that was an anti Affordable Care Act. But she told me, she said, well, the Republicans, we had 8 years to replace and repeal, and we haven't done it. So now I think we should even be out supporting this because it's the law of the land. So she even agreed to that. But so we looked at it. I wrote the email, sent it over there. The next day, they wrote back and said, well, what do you mean you're not going to be coming to help us? And so I was very careful about how I said it. But then 2 days later, I get this this newsletter. It says HHS abandons Mississippians. And so, I go take it right in, and then we have to send it up to Washington because I didn't want them to hear about it any other way. And so the personnel person, the head of personnel at HHS in Intergovernmental External Affairs, gets me and my boss on the phone, and they're dressing us down. They asked me, why did you feel the need to write this email to tell them you weren't coming? So I'm sitting there, I'm stewing inside, but of course, I had to be respectful of that. I asked, I said, well, would you have preferred we just didn't show up? Because I'd been the previous 4 years. And so they were expecting us. And so they told me they were going to send a formal apology to me that the next day I was going to send to the people who I told we weren't going to come and support. And they also told me to write this deep rationale about why I thought it was important that we be out supporting these partners of ours, which I did. Now, I'm still waiting on that apology, right? Because you know why? They didn't want to put anything in writing. 2 or 3 days later, the head of this group that coordinated this tour is called Mississippi Health Advocacy Program, because they work on behalf of all these, the least, the last, and the lost in Mississippi. He's on MSNBC on Ari Melber's show, and my email is plastered up on the screen. And then he's talking about how HHS and the administration is sabotaging the Affordable Care Act. So from then on, my life I was under a microscope, and I kept wondering, could I avoid getting fired? And everything we did, there was this person in DC that did what I did, but she did it at a very higher level. And somebody told me they heard her in the lunchroom and said, I can't stand there, Deric, because I hear he's still out down there carrying out the Obama agenda. But I would have weekly calls where we would bring in the people from CMS all the people enrolling people out in the community, they would call in and say, well, this is a problem we're having. This is a problem we're having. So I have no expertise, but I'll have the experts who would go back and tell them how to work around these problems. And we'd have a theme week. This could be Latin American week. It could be Native American week. It could be LGBTQ week, where the focus for promoting and getting people educated and enrolled was on those things. So I had to stop holding any of those calls. I had a colleague of mine at CMS who says, and CMS is the one that funded all this. She says, I'm not sending out, they sent her stuff, and she was supposed to send it out to all of these partners. She'd say, I'm not sending those out because I got 2 kids at home that like to eat. So, but I felt that I had a certain obligation to do whatever I could do without losing my job within the system to still try and support the people out there who are doing the work. And so I documented all this and, survived it. And so that's kind of that. But you remember, so this is something I never knew how to tweet, Jeff, before Donald Trump came in, and I had to learn this skill, right? And that was not my thing. But so I got to there was a lot of anxiety there. So because he demonized women, he demonized Latinos, he demonized Asians, he demonized Black-led run cities, he demonized immigrants, and so it was such a toxic environment all the time, every day, because you never knew. We had a responsibility for caring for the children separated from their parents at the borders. So we had a job at least a couple different times. So we helped the establishment of this center right outside of Miami that cared and housed these children separated from their parents at the borders. We were looking to set up one within an hour of Atlanta. So we had to call all these places and vet them, and these conservative places who wanted to be part of this process. So, and then of course we were watching. We were in part of the only all Black staff in the country, 4 of us, and we'd see these children and their fathers, trying to cross the Rio Grande. There's one time in particular, the man had his looked like a less than 2-year-old baby tucked in his shirt, and they washed up on the Rio Grande. And so in some ways for us, we're seeing our children. I know that there's some real issues with immigration. I understand that, but I think there's a humane way to do everything. And so these were things. So I'm groping for my phone about 4:35 every morning. I'm half asleep, and I'm looking to see what he's tweeted out that night that I'm going to have to react to in the morning. So it was a very toxic, caustic relationship for 4 years. The mischaracterization, I call them, of the justice marches to make them about the flag and patriotism, when it was really about over-policing of unarmed Black men. And yet that was never what the message was about. So those are the things that I felt like for the history book. I had never thought it would be this relevant, because now that we're about to go through 4 more years, I thought it would be something for historical purposes that poli-sci people in history and sociology departments would study. But, I think there's a lot of guidance about what we're about to go back through. So that's kind of why I titled it The Longest 4 Years of My Life, A View from the Field by a Black Fed in the Trump administration. And people can get it on Amazon if they're interested.
Is this like a guidebook for people in government especially, or is this for anyone? Is it like a survival?
It's for anyone. A lot of it is about the ACA, but again, it's about, it takes you through Trump and justice. You look at the amount of school shootings and mass shootings were up at a higher level than they ever had been before. There were more guns purchased in the Obama administration than ever been purchased in this country. I think a lot of it was a backlash again to the Obama administration. So it is through the eyes, but I deal with healthcare, I deal with justice, and certainly in race, because again, I think that there's no question in my mind he's the most divisive president, in our lifetimes. Clearly,
well purposefully.
Absolutely. He tapped into something in white America, Jeff, that I think it's an undercurrent, but it's still there.
Well, there's that, but it's not just white American. It's amazing how many immigrants who are undocumented, who are sympathetic. They don't think it's going to happen to them. I know a lot of African Americans who are Trump African Americans. And listen, I don't, history will tell who's right or wrong. And we're recording this on December 18th, 2024, but this show will probably be the first Garden Views I drop in the new year, because this is not exactly a great time of year to really drop anything new.
Thank you.
No, and I think it'll be just as appropriate in 2 weeks as
Absolutely.
Nobody's listening to anything this week. Everyone's buying Christmas gifts or whatever. But as I'm looking at the headlines, the Dow plunges, Musk blows up a spending deal, and the U.S. barrels towards a shutdown. The Speaker, Mike Johnson, a Republican, a very Christian conservative, evangelical conservative, was supporting, and, Musk, Trump, and Vance, knocked that down. And I understand that's part of their brand, and this will probably get worked out in the 11th hour and all of that good stuff. But I don't know. Maybe it won't. And they're all about deficit spending and getting rid of it. But if we forfeit, the country's credit goes to the down the tube, and and the world does sort of operate on, like, people can say economics is fictional, but sort of all of the banks and institutions in the world, subscribe to the same fiction of the economics. And when you don't, that's the difference between a Ponzi scheme and actually, an institution. So I don't know. I'm worried. I sort of wish I could go into a cryogenic chamber for a few years and take a long nap. But that is not that's not to be. But literally, I'm looking at the headlines as you're saying that, and Mr. Trump has not yet even been inaugurated. Now, the current president, people have different opinions on whether he's MIA, whether he's given up, or whether he's in compos mentis. I don't know. Probably doesn't matter now because he's such a secondary figure to 47. So it'll be good for content creators. I don't.
It will. It indeed will.
I don't know what else to say. So pick up The Longest 4 Years of My Life by Deric Gilliard. It's Deric Gilliard. Like you said, you can find it on Amazon. Consider it maybe your survival guide and a little bit of an insight. And if you're interested in things that he's interested in, or learning someone else's perspective, then check that out. Again, I thank you for your patience with me and listening to my long rants or diatribes that sometimes turn into cogent questions, and other times probably failed on that. But I appreciate it. Was there anything that I should have asked you about, or anything that you wanted to address that we didn't get a chance to do?
No, I think you did a great job. It was expansive, but that's good. That's good. Yeah, no, it will be very interesting. I think the only thing I would say is that I do have concerns, just that this is going to be the wealthiest cabinet that's ever been, and so I have concerns about their concern for the average American and those who may be on the margins as we look forward to not necessarily positively, but the Project 2025 playbook being implemented. It will be implemented, but he has pretty close to a mandate. So this is what we chose. So it will be very interesting to see in retrospect how this all turns out.
Well, the one bright side for you is that you are now free to write policy papers if you want, or to just watch cartoons if you want. You can do whatever you want. But if you do write policy papers and proposals, I'd be interested in seeing them. You have my email, and hopefully I will understand them. But if I can understand them, that probably means most people can understand them. And I think a little simplicity would go a long way. I'm a big believer that if every problem has a 10-point solution, and I'm making up that number, it's an easy round number, there's probably somewhere between 6 and 8 things that most people could agree on that are not in the Congress. And I think sometimes that our elected representatives, or worse, they're not doing their jobs, so it gets delegated to appointees, in the executive branch, whatnot, focus on the 2.5 to 4 things that we'll never agree on, and skip the 6.
Right.
And if we just did the 6, yeah, sure, that's a D.
That's right.
But D is better than an F.
That's progress.
Exactly. All right. Again,
thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you. All right, Deric Gilliard, thank you very much. And those of you who, if you're here by accident, please subscribe to Garden of Doom. You get Garden of Doom, Garden Views, and God Presents the Book of Black. Garden of Doom, sort of the same variety as this, but in a whole, well, scope of variety, but a whole different area. Think Joe Rogan without the broness. Garden Views is sort of this, a lot of law, a lot of tech, a lot of business, a lot of politics, policy, real politics, and some entertainment as well. And God Presents the Book of Black is me and my co-host BJ Black. But this week it was the Gospel of Thomas, because it was Mr. Thomas, my team of professional wrestlers who talk to me and other people in wrestling about Garden of Doom things. So all 3 shows come to you for the price of 0 if you just subscribe to Garden of Doom. And if you like it, give us a rating and a review, and let your friends know, let your enemies know, let your mom know. Maybe your mom will listen. My mom doesn't listen, so that's great. Occasionally she does, but not all the time. So I don't know. That's probably not a good sales pitch, I suppose. Even my mom doesn't listen to my show. But anyway, thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of your night, folks. You'll hear from us next time on The Garden.